it's pretty safe to say that this is a weapon of some kind. And of course, they have many that they've been developing. China has been around the world stealing biological material, stealing information about genetic sequences of virulent microorganisms for years and years. Why? Because they want to find the best microorganisms and weaponize them. And that is part of a competent biological warfare program. If, as General Chi says, their objective is to clean up America, they have to hit us with a number of diseases that are going to attrit the population down so low that we could not resist an invasion, that we could not mount a nuclear attack, that we would collapse basically from the illness. We see the mayhem in China from this thing right now. Imagine if you had a number of diseases at once, all the hospitals overwhelmed, all of the economic actors panicking, the political centers not knowing what to do or how to cope. This as a beginning of an attack on the U.S.
All right, author and columnist Jeff Nyquist joins me now. He's been covering the coronavirus and all of the developing and breaking news, of which we have a lot right now. So I'm really not sure where to begin with Jeff. I almost kind of want to just lay out the latest and then get Jeff to connect the dots here. But there really is so much to look at here. You've got it now pretty much going mainstream. And of course, Jeff wrote the article a couple weeks ago. Did China's plan to destroy the United States backfire? Of course, the man-made bioweapon developed in Chinese, was it meant for America? I think we may have some evidence of this, and I don't even know if Jeff's seen this yet, but this comes from the CBP.gov, official story. Dulles CBP intercepts dead birds in passenger baggage from China. Now, there's no explanation as to what these dead birds would be doing, except maybe as food, but you look at the dead birds, I don't know anybody that would want to eat that. There's not even any meat on the bones, so that's suspicious. They're trying to find out people that have corona in Hawaii, the origins of that. Obviously, coronavirus people that have it are being flown in, detained. The numbers coming out of China are obviously not adding up. But then you have the World Health Organization teaming up with big tech to censor people from sharing news and stories and videos of the coronavirus. So Jeff Nyquist, you wrote the article last month, kind of seeing it before, kind of like InfoWars, like, is this a man-made bioweapon from China? Were they trying to attack America? What do you make with all the latest news, and how do you connect all these dots?
Well, out of the hundreds of cities in China, the COVID-19 virus appears in Wuhan, which is the center of their viral biological warfare research. So what are the odds that it would happen? And by the way, if this was just something casually, randomly mutating off of animals onto people, why would it have to be in China? China has a very sophisticated biological warfare program, and I brought up in the article a speech by General Chi Hao-chen, who happened to be the defense minister of China at the time. This speech was made about 17, 18 years ago to a select level of high party cadres, that's high-level Communist Party leaders. And he was no ordinary general. As the defense minister, he was also on the party military commission, which oversaw the entire Chinese military system from the point of view of the ruling Communist Party. And Xi's speech is quite long, quite technical, and I was able to verify this speech for my own information. I have over the years concentrated on Russia more than China, but my interest, one of my interests is the sociology of mass destruction weapons. Biological weapons are perhaps the most destructive weapons of human beings. And this speech by Chi Hao-chen, when it was translated by Epoch Times in 2005, at first I was kind of dismissive. But when I got into the details, I found a detail that a Russian defector who worked in China told me in 1999. Colonel Stanislav Lunev, who had defected from the Russian military, he had been the deputy head of the GRU in the United States at the time of his defection. Lunev told me about a meeting of the Russian generals in Moscow in early 1992. They had made a treaty with China for spying on the United States and sharing all intelligence. And the other thing they had done is that they had a war plan with China. And of course, the Soviet Union, this was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which is quite remarkable. The general said our nuclear war plan against America is still on, only we are not going to invade the lower 48 states. China is going to do it. We will invade Alaska and parts of Canada. And they talked about a division of North America between China and Russia, where Russia would get Alaska and parts of Canada, China would get the lower 48 states, and I presume other parts of Canada, and other countries would be invited in for looting rights. And the thing that's significant is that in Xi's speech, which appeared in English in 2005, there is a passage. Xi refers to trading territory in the north with Russia to get the territory we need in the lower 48 states. Now, maybe I should explain. Xi begins the speech explaining China's problem: overpopulation, severe degradation of the environment from pollution. They need, excuse me, they need new land. Where are they going to get it? He said, India, Southeast Asia. If we try to invade that land, the Americans will oppose us. And
Plus,
we won't
there's
get
no
anywhere.
room. It's already too populated.
Well, they don't. They will depopulate. But he said that basically it's trivial compared to North America. That's the best land in the world. And he said if we have to fight the Americans anyway, we might as well make the land in North America. And so he said we need to clean up America. How to do it? He said a nuclear war won't do, because if we have a nuclear war with America, China will be destroyed too. So what we need to do is a surprise biological attack on America to clean America up. Those are the words that he uses. And he said that, he says we communists, we consider ourselves communist humanitarians, and it's tragic, and America helped China in World War II, but it's them or us, because they stand in our way, and we have to build a second China on new land to keep China from imploding. And he talked about this social implosion coming to China from overpopulation, a downturn in the economy, and environmental pollution. And he said if this social implosion happens, they will blame the CCP, the Chinese Communist ruling party, and we will all be hung as criminals. And he said, so we have to justify our rule of China by teaching the Chinese people how to go out. And biological weapons, he said, give us the best chance. And he mentioned them making already by that time a number of biological weapons. He talked about genetic engineering of weapons and genetic specific weapons to target specific races or groups of people. And although he said this technology might be, 20, 30 years in the future, might not be accessible. But this speech is quite sensational, and I believe it's absolutely authentic. The senior editors at Epoch Times, of course, they know where it comes from. They know how their paper acquired it from the original Chinese. They have Josh Phillip has posted on Twitter the original Chinese text. If you go to Josh's Twitter feed, you'll find it there.
This is some pretty next level information here, and I don't know how deep you want to go down the path you were on with basically the means to what would really be, I guess, World War III or World War IV, depend on which historian you talk to, with China and Russia invading the West. And I can't even tell you how much stuff was going through my head when you mentioned about Russia and China, because it was my understanding that China would kind of come in under the guise of the UN. And those would really be Chinese troops, but under the guise of the UN, so that Americans wouldn't freak out. But I guess the coronavirus, it would have just ended up wiping out large population bases. And I guess they would have figured it didn't matter who or what, as long as the UN was there to kind of mop it up, then China could come in. I mean, is that kind of your understanding in 30 seconds?
Well, the virus is a precursor weapon. They would use multiple diseases. For example, the Russians had bubonic plague, anthrax, and smallpox as their weapon vectors that they manufactured large amounts. The Chinese, the virus that only kills a small percentage of the population, but disables another large part, is a precursor for other diseases to be spread that will do more destruction. But we're talking
So kind of like
about
a primer.
yes, like a primer, exactly. This is the kind of weapon you use to put people in bed. A sick person requires other people to take care of them. If you've got a pandemic in which tens of millions of Americans are infected, and this is an illness that you could be hospitalized for 3 weeks, you've flooded all the hospitals already. You've infected medical staff. You've degraded systems. You've caused economic panic throughout the country because people, of course, will panic when something like this happens. It will disrupt many systems in the country. Then you hit them with something even more lethal. You hit them with, weaponized Ebola.
All right, we got to go to a break here, but
smallpox.
let's actually focus on this and then the large chessboard when we come back with Jeff Nyquist. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you this. You're getting next level information from Jeff Nyquist right now, and I'll be honest. I didn't really expect the interview to go this direction. I thought we'd more focus on the latest coronavirus news. That's kind of the backdrop, but I really want to continue to get into Jeff's mind here on what he was talking about with the land invasion by China and how they had reached closed-door agreements with Russia and I'm sure other nations as well to launch such a thing. And there's little signs. I mean, there's more than just signs, quite frankly, that the public will probably never even be allowed to know. But there's little signs like the UN trying to move in and like what Jeff was talking about in the last segment with things that the Chinese have said. Now, let's bring it back, though, to the coronavirus. And again, the headline in the Epoch Times from Jeff 2 weeks ago, did China's plan to destroy the United States backfire? So, Jeff, America was really at a point where I think that if all the wheels were in motion and they were just waiting for that last click to send this whole thing into motion, and that last click was, let's just say, we can use it for an example, you may disagree, the last click was Hillary Clinton getting in office, and then everything else just falls into place. Well, when you talk about the coronavirus being a Chinese plan to destroy the United States, so do you think that this was intended to be released in the U.S.? It's been planned for decades, and somehow, some way, call it, celestial intervention, call it incompetence. Basically, it got released on their own people, and now they're scrambling around try to contain it in China, and they can't go through with their plans of releasing it here in the U.S. Jeff Nyquist, break it down.
Well, we don't have proof as yet that it is a weapon, although if you look at the probabilities and you look at the evidence that it was manufactured, that it's not a naturally occurring or microorganism, I think, it's pretty safe to say that this is a weapon of some kind. And of course, they have many that they've been developing. China has been around the world stealing biological material, stealing information about genetic sequences of virulent microorganisms for years and years. Why? Because they want to find the best microorganisms and weaponize them. And that is part of a competent biological warfare program. If, as General Xi says, their objective is to clean up America, they have to hit us with a number of diseases that are going to attrit the population down so low that we could not resist an invasion, that we could not mount a nuclear attack, that we would collapse, basically, from the illness. We see the mayhem in China from this thing right now. Imagine if you had a number of diseases at once, all the hospitals overwhelmed, all of the economic actors panicking, the political centers not knowing what to do or how to cope. This as a beginning of an attack on the U.S. Of course, we know from Russian literature on how to open nuclear war, they have something called the preparatory period, in which they do diversionary attacks through intermediaries, terrorists controlled by intermediaries. This is called Gray Terror. We're already in that phase of it. Gray Terror is diversionary because we're not focused on Russia and China. We're focused on Muslims in caves that supposedly are going to nuke us. And then you had testimony from people like Colonel Stanislav Lunev saying, look, we searched for locations in the United States to stockpile nuclear and biological weapons in advance of a war, so that, that's arms caches. Also arms caches for troops coming into the country. And of course, what he told me was the model for invasion is Hitler's invasion of Norway, where your troops enter as tourists, or they're already here as students, or they maybe cross over from Mexico. They go to the arms caches, they get their uniforms, they get their weapons, or the nuclear weapons with which they can attack our cities. I think from my frustration from years of studying is that we just trade with China. We just trade with Russia and these countries that mean to do us real serious harm. Their leaders do, not their people, but their leaders. We trade with them and we open ourselves up. Do you realize that most of our vitamins are made in China?
Oh, yeah, it's like 95% of the source material in pharmaceuticals is from China. I mean, I don't know the percentage of the goods manufactured. I mean, everybody knows about that. And really, at the end of the day, I mean, we can blame foreign policy, but at the end of the day, I mean, this comes down to business leaders that are using China for their cheap labor in order to make a quick buck. But let me just kind of stop there for a second, if you don't mind, and just draw back, because you brought up the Middle East. What is the connection there? Because, I mean, I don't know your opinion on this matter, but to me, like you said, us sitting here distracted, really focused on the Middle East, saying that the boogeyman's hiding in a cave, saying that the Muslims are our biggest enemy. To me, this is just bad foreign policy. And then bad actors get involved and take advantage of these wars, figure out how they can get rich off of these wars, and engage in all sorts of nefarious activity. And so China's been watching this. Obviously, Russia's been watching this. Did they view that as that foreign policy, call it whatever you want, corrupt, weak, whatever? Did they view that as a weakness that they could kind of use as a distraction to come in and invade?
Look, it's very bad to take the bait and be diverted by an enemy diversionary attack. You've heard of Alexander Litvinenko. He was the Russian who was poisoned in London with polonium by the Russian special services, died horribly of radiation poisoning, named Putin as his assassin. The British investigators traced the radiation on Lufthansa back to Moscow. They know this radioactive material came from Russia. They poisoned him. Why did they poison him? In 2005, the year before, Litvinenko gave an interview. Now, he's a defector from the FSB. He worked under Putin when Putin was the head of the FSB. Litvinenko said that Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of al-Qaeda, was trained in Russia. Why did he know? He knew because he was responsible for maintaining the secrecy of Ayman al-Zawahiri being in Russia in the mid-90s, being trained by the Russian special services. The fact is that Litvinenko claimed that al-Qaeda was this kind of diversionary attack, that many of the leaders in al-Qaeda were Russian agents, and that Russia was using this terrorism as a way to attack the West. I've developed other sources. Viktor Suvorov, another GRU defector, wrote about this in a book called Spetsnaz. It was published in the UK in 1987. In a chapter called Spetsnaz's First World War, he talked about this gray terror in which the West would seemingly be attacked by terrorist forces, but that these forces would be controlled by Russia through intermediaries with no, direct connection to Moscow that you could trace. All of these things came to pass. And the reason it's called the preparatory period is that they have to divert our intelligence resources and our military resources to actors and regions that are not them, so that they can build up their weapons, which they've been doing, by the way, since 9/11. Russia and China have gotten very strong so that the balance of power is tipped. Maybe you saw the article put out about the Russian and Chinese submarines, that the Navy saying, well, we don't know in a war we could control our own coastal water.
Pause it right there, because we're about to go to a break. But I want to use this opportunity to say something that's so important, or so important for President Trump in America right now. This is why we need to get out of the Middle East, folks, because other countries having international meetings use that to say, look at all the harm they're doing in the Middle East. We have to do something about it. I mean, folks, we got to get out of the damn Middle East. It's killing us. All right, we brought Jeff Nyquist on. His story from the Epoch Times, did China's plan to destroy the U.S. backfire, ended up being next week's news today. So we bring him on for that. It's kind of diverted from the coronavirus news into a foreign policy thing, but how it ties into the coronavirus. Could it be a biological weapon that was intended for the United States by China? We're kind of laying that backdrop. So let's kind of go back into that foreign policy discussion and then just get your final thoughts and comments on the coronavirus before we let you go. But I'll just say this, you know, I don't necessarily trust British intelligence when it comes to the polonium poisoning of that individual. But I do know this. The Chinese have been looking at America as weak for a while, and obviously with your intelligence and your research had plans to even come in and invade and take it down. The Middle East foreign policy has been one big giant hoax is the best way I could describe it. A giant boondoggle. Russia sees that, doesn't like it, and so they just want to see it end. I don't even think politically they have any interest between the United States and China. They just want to see the corruption in the Middle East end, and with all the land and resources they have, are just kind of sitting there like Cinderella waiting for whoever to put the glass slipper on their feet. And now with Trump, Russia's maybe looking at the United States instead of China. So that's kind of the foreign policy backdrop that I see going on that would lead to us talking about China creating a bioweapon to be released in the United States, which is coronavirus. Which, did it get accidentally released in China, or how did that go down? So just kind of respond to that with the foreign policy backdrop, and then bring it back to the coronavirus.
Well, China is a communist country. The ruling ideology of China is communism. Mao Zedong is the chief ideologist. And as Bill Gertz reported in his latest book, Deceiving the Sky, no other Chinese leader since Mao has embraced the rigid orthodox communist ideology more than Xi Jinping. So we should not be fooled by this slick capitalist exterior of communist China. It's a communist country. We also should not be fooled by Putin's act. The collapse of the Soviet Union was not what it appeared to be. Russia, the communist apparatchiks and the nomenclatura remained in power in Russia despite everything that happened. And they've been trying to put the Soviet Union back together again ever since. Their formation of an alliance with communist China is not the only communist alliance they have. There are military advisors in communist North Korea. The Russians are building bases in communist Nicaragua under Daniel Ortega. They're allied with Cuba. There are Russian and Chinese troops in Venezuela right now. Why do you think they're there? Why is Russia helping all the communist countries in Sub-Saharan Africa? Why are they arming South Africa, which is ruled by the ANC, which is a communist front? The fact of the matter is that communism and the communist bloc still exists. It was not destroyed in 1991. The fall of the Berlin Wall was only a setback. It wasn't the destruction of communism. And they have nuclear weapons. Right now, they have more nuclear weapons than they do. China and Russia are big powers with big abilities to destroy other countries. In fact, only China and Russia have the ability to destroy the United States.
Which by the way, they really think they could win. I think in a war. I think that Trump trying to re-bolster the military and give it the morale is his response to that. But I want to just take you back for a second, because you're saying you think the matchup with China and Russia is there from the beginning, and it has communist ties, as where I'm saying I look at Russia as just a nation still searching for its role in the world order, still trying to figure out its role in the world order coming out of communism. And you're saying, no, the communists in Russia are no doubtedly teamed up with China.
2.5 years ago was the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. At that time, Russia hosted at Sochi the World Conference of Youth and Students, which is a communist organization which has been hosted in different communist countries since World War II. And Putin was the keynote speaker. You can find this speech online. Putin says that he believes in them. They are the future. He is behind them. These are communists. They're all waving communist flags, wearing communist T-shirts. This is a massive communist youth organization from all around the world. This is the speech that Putin made. Putin has told at meetings with journalists that he never got rid of his party card, that he wasn't a communist because he had to be in the KGB. He has said publicly that he was a communist because he likes communist ideas. The fact of the matter is that that Putin does the same thing Stalin did. Stalin famously rode a horse in two directions. That is, he could appear to be a nationalist, a Russian nationalist, when he had to be during the Great Patriotic War, but he was also a communist. And when in 1943 the Soviet Union dissolved the Comintern, it was a deception, just like when they supposedly dissolved it after the fall of the Soviet Union. They are still supporting all around the world communist regimes. There are still communist takeovers and revolutions happening. More recently, Nepal and Nicaragua, the communists have taken over in those countries. We know about Venezuela. There's different African countries. The Congo had its revolution in the late 90s. What do you mean communism is dead? Who won the Angolan Civil War?
I'll just say this because I want to give you time to finish up on the coronavirus, just to put it out there. And I think this is a good debate. Maybe we could even have it. I just disagree with you on Russia's stance. I just think Russia is searching for identity. And I think, quite frankly, the biggest drive of where they were going was because of the Middle East foreign policy of the United States, now corrupt that was. And I think they'd be open-minded to maybe go a different way if we could clean that up. But that's my opinion. Yeah. Your research tells you something differently. But in the last 2 minutes here, just what do you think was behind the coronavirus? Where do you think it goes next? And what do you think the audience needs to know?
Well, the thing to watch for, already in the Russian press, there are accusations that this is a biological weapon made by us put against China. China has hinted at this when the Chinese Foundation of Science and Technology put out a piece saying that this virus is specifically targeted at Asians. So we have to watch to see if this propaganda is amplified, because this is very dangerous pre-war propaganda. Blaming the United States for attacking China with a biological weapon would be a justification for them actually using some of their more nasty stuff on us, especially once we get hit by the coronavirus, because it's coming to us. This thing is as contagious as the common cold. It is not going to be contained here. It is going to break out for every person that we know has it. There's probably 3 to 4 people walking around spreading it. People can be asymptomatic for up to 24 days, they're saying now. There's no way you can contain something like this. So we are going to have this virus too. It's going to be here.
Well, and it already is here. So, I mean, that's already reported. I mean, it's already here. In fact, they're looking for somebody in Hawaii who they think may have it. So it's already floating around here. But, I mean, as far as evidence is concerned, I've seen none that show it was made in the U.S. or came from the U.S.
Yeah, no, I mean, people are going to, this is we're in a propaganda war. We've been in a information war with China and Russia for decades and decades. A lot of the negative messages that appear in our press about ourselves come from their agent networks. Influence operations are a very big part of what they do, trying to get us to turn on ourselves, to divide and conquer us, to try to split us. This is typical tactics by the communists. I mean, it's a very old game. And we have to be aware that some of the messages coming through our own newspapers and radio and television are coming from people who are bought and paid for by China and or Russia.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's been proven in cases like Dianne Feinstein. All right, Jeff Nyquist, thank you so much. You'll have to come on again, and maybe even with Alex to talk about this stuff. Jeff Nyquist, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And there's so, like you said, there's so much disinformation. I mean, Russia has their fake news too, just like the United States has their fake news, and we're just trying to figure out. But the next couple of weeks will tell us what's going on with coronavirus.